Alright, time to make a new video. Let's see what Twitter says. Seriously, Twitter? How can you not fall asleep when listening to him? Fine. But if he starts with a 1-hour feels before reels preaching that's half Russian novelist and half completely unrelated, not backed up postmodernist Jesus conclusions, I am going to avenge myself. So, let's see. Hey, that's not that long. Problem with atheism. Sounds interesting too. Okay, let's do this.
In Dostoevsky's book Crime and Punishment,
I knew it!
in Dostoevsky's book Crime and Punishment, he has his main character, Raskolnikov, decides that he's going to commit a murder, and he has very good justification for the murder. And Dostoevsky's very good at this. He puts his characters into very, very difficult moral situations.
Okay, so we're talking about an imaginary character in a novel here. Very well, good. Continue.
And gives them full justification for pursuing pursuing the pathway that they're pursuing. And so Raskolnikov, he's broke and starving. He wants to go to law school. His sister's about to prostitute herself, roughly speaking, by marrying a guy that hates her, that she hates, and he has contempt for her, at least acts in that manner.
How is that prostitution? If that's prostitution, then the Middle Ages were basically a mass brothel. And isn't it her business whom she wants to marry for whatever reason, and not her brother's? I mean, sure, it might be really stupid from her side, but it's... I know, I'm sorry. Continue.
He's trying to rescue his mother as well, who's also in dire financial straits. He goes to a pawnbroker to pawn his meager possession so that he can continue to scrape by, and she has this niece, I believe it's her niece, that's not very bright, who she basically treats as a slave and is horrible to. And so the pawnbroker has this money. Raskolnikov is in dire need. He thinks, look, I'll just kill her, because why the hell not? I'll take her money. She's not doing any good with it anyways. I'll free her niece, who's just lurking as a slave. She's got all these other people tangled up in her pawnbroker schemes. All that'll happen is the world will be a better place.
So Raskolnikov has financial problems, finds a person he doesn't like, and now he tries to rationalize a reason to kill her into his mind to feel less bad about it. Interesting, interesting.
And the only thing that's holding me back is conventional moral cowardice. And, you know, Dostoevsky has his character in Crime and Punishment go through days, hours and days and weeks of intense imagination about this, rationalization about this, trying to justify himself, placing himself outside the law so that he can perpetrate this act, and telling himself with all the best nihilistic arguments that the only possible thing that could be holding him back is an arbitrary sense of indoctrinated morality.
Hold on there a second. So he doesn't think that killing someone has consequences? Maybe getting locked up because he breaks the law or something? Doesn't he have an evolutionary inbuilt emotional resistance to kill people at least, like most people on the planet? Is he a sociopath or something? I know, I'm sorry, yes, listen and believe, I will shut up, I'm sorry, I won't interrupt again.
And so Dostoevsky explores that. He does commit the murder, and then of course all hell breaks loose because things don't necessarily turn out the way that you want. He gets away with it, however. Well, he gets away with it technically because no one knows he did it. But he doesn't get away with it in relationship to his own conscience. And so the rest of the book explores that.
So he does have remorses. Seems like he's not a sociopath after all. Thank you very much for this moderately disturbing good night story. Very nice, very lovely, but what exactly does this have to do with atheism?
Well, Dostoevsky, I believe it was in Crime and Punishment, although he makes the same point in many of his books, he makes a very fundamental point, and this is the kind of point that I think that people who haven't investigated these matters down this particular literary and philosophical pathway never grapple with. Dostoevsky said straightforwardly, if there's no God, so if there's no higher value, let's say, if there's no transcendent value, then you can do whatever you want. And that's the question that he's investigating. And you see...
Yeah, now that you say it, that makes perfect sense. Fiction authors are just so woke. I mean, even Dante Alighieri said if you execute Julius Caesar, you get turned into Lucifer's chewing gum. Oh no, my bad, it doesn't. In order to do what the character eventually does, he has not only to break the law of the country he lives in, but pretty much to persuade himself that it's okay to do what he does, by making up his own reasons to act this way. What makes you possibly think that a believing God would have a different outcome? What makes you believe that he couldn't, for example, find justifications for the murder within his faith to encourage him to do this kind of stuff?
This is why I have such frustration, say, with people like Sam Harris, the sort of radical atheists, because they seem to think that once human beings abandon their grounding in the transcendent, that the plausible way forward is with a kind of purist rationality that automatically attributes to other people equivalent value.
In his book The Moral Landscape, Sam Harris defines that there are facts and that there are values, and how we can use facts to inform our value system. But I don't remember him ever conflating the two. Unless he turned 180 degrees on that, I don't think he does. When radical creepy reptoid Illuminati atheists, such as myself, want people to drop their dogmatic nonsense, it's usually because, in our opinion, following beliefs blindly can be very harmful. You can, for example, believe that your toddler doesn't need medical attention because Jesus will cure the leukemia. Or that every suicide mail is of the devil because the Holy Patriarchy says so, and therefore you may as well preemptively sue them. Or that Jesus saves you from car crashes when you fall asleep at the wheel. See previous videos. I dare you to tell me that if we replace their dogmatic woo-woo with critical thinking, they wouldn't be better off. And when we then point towards egalitarianism as an alternative to the almighty spanking facility you prefer, that is merely us offering a qualitatively better alternative. Whether you like it or not, values can and will always be attributed by everyone personally. That is a fact. Not an ideology, and it won't go away just because you suddenly poof a sky fairy into existence for yourself. And that is already shown merely by the fact that the people raised with the same dogma, for example Christianity, can believe their fellow humans are equal to them because they're all made in the image of God, or they can believe that them atheist people are Canaanites and ought to be locked up, if not purged. Likewise, people with very different bases for their morality can come to the very same conclusion. Whether I consider you equal because I believe that we share a common ancestor or because I believe we're made in the image of God doesn't change the fact that I consider you unequal.
I just don't understand that. They believe that that's the rational pathway. What the hell is irrational about me getting exactly what I want from every one of you whenever I want it at every possible second? Why is that irrational? And how possibly is that more irrational than us cooperating so we can both have a good time of it?
Okay. Aside from the fact that I'm very much creeped out by your disturbingly uncompassionate way of thinking, most people are generally by default empathic enough not to even wonder about it. Some are so bad at being bad that their husband Logic makes fun of them when they pretend to be the bad guy in Knights of the Old Republic and then end up saving the poor kid's granny anyway. But just to make sure you won't go berserk on your fellow humans, let me give you a few examples of why such a reasoning is rational and also selfish. Dirty. Evolution. We are hardwired to be social and to cooperate. Except of a small percentage of the population with altered brain functions or hormonal defects, most people get a certain degree of emotional feedback when dealing with other humans. If someone is angry at us, we tend to get a tiny bit sour ourselves. If someone smiles at us, we tend to get a tinge happier, and so on. An extreme example for this is my sister, who turns into a light bulb of perma-smile whenever people unpack and like her presence. Then there is convenience. It is so much easier for all of us to split our duties than to do it all ourselves. You can't quite get to enjoy your iPhone if you have to grow your own food, mix your own medication, produce your own clothes and shoes, fix up your own car, glass blow your own jars to store your canned food in, and sit on your repurposed bike and pedal to produce your own electricity whenever you don't quite find the time to fix your self-made windmill yet. Most of the things we know and have nowadays are a result of cooperation of humans in the past and present. And because it is hard to get favors or cooperation from people, if you are unwilling to help them too, most people tend to cooperate. So we saw that cooperating can be highly to our advantage, and that the positive emotional feedback from doing good things is also to our advantage because it makes us feel good. But have you ever wondered why nearly everyone stops at a red traffic light even when there is nobody there? There is no divine guru telling you that you have to follow the sacred greens and fear and yield to the diabolic rats, and yet the drivers abide. And while most people don't really think about why they do it, the answer seems to me rather simple. You don't really want to waste money on a ticket. You don't really want to trash your own car by someone driving into it. And you rather don't want to risk to get jailed or fined for accidental manslaughter either. And some people, believe it or not, simply like to follow the rules. On the other hand, there's no warranty that blindly following a transcendental ideology won't turn you into a danger to yourself and society. After all, we should never ever question anything we are told by Almighty Sky Daddy. He is great and Flying Pony Person is his messenger.
I don't understand that. I mean, it's as if the psychopathic tendency is irrational. There's nothing irrational about it. It's pure naked self-interest. How is that irrational? I don't understand that.
Which makes me wonder if that's maybe not a problem you personally have. Jordi, would you really simply go around killing people without a divine whipping machine telling you not to? Do you have sociopathic tendencies? Jordi, you can tell me. I won't reveal it to anyone. I promise. But just to boggle your mind a bit, let me point out a few things to you. The protagonist in your own example wasn't just going, okay, you know what, I'm gonna kill this pawn shop owner at 10, at 11 I have a date with the niece, and at 12 I should go check on my mother's cat. He instead was pretty much trying to talk himself into it. And on top of that, by the way you yourself describe it, he was weighing off whether or not his act would be considered evil or not by, for example, taking into account the effect this person has on other people. In other words, the well-being of other humans were part of the equation. He didn't want to act fully selfishly, or at least he wanted to believe that he didn't. A bit like if you asked people if they could go back in time and kill baby Hitler if they would actually do so, and they would agree, they would do so to save the people who died as a result of his actions, and not because they just want to kill random people. So purely naked selfishness without God falls flat in your own example. And just as a side note, I don't quite understand why you insist on 100% rationality either. No matter how much we try to be rational or not, human beings are not machines. We don't act 100% rational. Most people have an emotional blockage to kill people, one that sociopaths and psychopaths don't have, which is why they are dangerous to society and why we have laws in place to deal with them. And last but not least, have you noticed how in the recent years, this horrible hellhole called modern Europe that is mostly secular nowadays, suddenly became so much more wonderful and loving the moment where this huge influx of God-fearing people came along? No, me neither. I wonder why.
Where's the pathway from rationality to an egalitarian virtue? Why the hell not every man for himself and the devil take the hindmost? It's a perfectly coherent philosophy. And it's actually one that you can institute in the world with a fair bit of material success if you want to do it.
I am not a philosophy guru, and I know that egalitarianism is used differently in different places. When I talk about egalitarianism, I restrict myself to the idea that people have all the same rights, laws, and opportunities. That doesn't mean equal outcome. I find absolute equal outcome very authoritarian and not equal at all, because differences in a society are part of a healthy society. And while you don't want the poorest of the poor to starve and lie dead on the street, you also don't want to finance them a Ferrari because everyone else has a car. So I don't include it necessarily in the definition, and nor do most of the people I know of, neither on YouTube nor outside. However, it is included as social egalitarianism in the definition, which is why I put in this caveat. Good, so now that we have defined our terms, what exactly is rational about egalitarianism? Well, in a system where people are equal entities in front of the law, have all the same rights and have all the same requirements for job hirings, you have a modestly decent chance to make your way up in the economic or social food chain, no matter where you currently are. However, in a system where, for example, half of the population needs permit from daddy or hubby to even ask for the job, that is pretty unlikely. Just as it is unlikely in a system where your acceptance in university is tied to the abundance of melanin in your skin or the absence of testicles. Just saying. What you're looking for is not a rational approach, Jordi, but a pragmatic one. Why should people who are on the top restrict themselves even if they don't directly benefit? And guess what? There is a rationale also for that, because there is a benefit to having the door to wealth open for lower classes. First of all, it makes it possible for you or your children to get back up to the top if you ever happen to have a crisis and happen to fall. And on top of that, you have another benefit if you are the one on the top, because you're much less likely to get shortened by a hat if everyone knows they have an okay chance to reach there too one day. And just as an aside, have you ever noticed how much development and advancement this kind of mindset has actually given the US? The idea that if you're diligent, you'll get somewhere has encouraged a ton of inventions. If you're diligent, you will get somewhere, and while you're at it, you will invent my television and my microwave and find a way to make it so cheap that even lower income homes are able to afford it. In fact, as far as I know, 98% of the US homes possess a TV. Compare that with the let's all be equal, poor and miserable mindset of the communists, and you will see why it might be good to have that.
So I don't see, to me, I think that the universe that people like Dawkins and Harris inhabit is so intensely conditioned by mythological presuppositions that they take for granted the ethic that emerges out of that as if it's just a given.
No system is a given. The idea that we should have the right to vote for the person in charge of us is not a given. The idea that we should be free to think what we want is not a given. The idea that we should be allowed to smoke, drink, or even eat bacon is also not a given. And unless after the moral landscape Sam Harris made a 180-degree turn in his thinking, which I don't believe, I'm somewhat doubting that the ones suffering from being intensely conditioned by mythological propositions might be him and not you.
A rational given, and this of course precisely not Nietzsche's observation as well as Dostoevsky's. That's Nietzsche's observation. You don't get it.
Hold on there. Just because a system is not a given doesn't mean that we have to add Dostoevsky's divine spanking tool into the equation. Traffic lights are not a given either. You have to teach people how to use them and what they're good for. But even so, there is no God required to make people stop on red. In fact, if my former debunking subjects are anything to go by, then you can see and hear how some people actually do put more trust in Transcendental Jesus and not in the traffic regulations, and what kind of danger they're posing to themselves and to the rest of society.
He's accusing God of keeping this thing, this tree, all to himself.
The ethic that you think is normative is a consequence of its nesting inside this tremendously lengthy history, much of which was expressed in mythological formulation. You wipe that out. You don't get to keep all the presuppositions and just assume that they're rationally axiomatic.
A certain ethic is normative if the majority of people, the norm, follows it or abides by it. It neither tells you how old it is, nor if it's good or bad, nor if it makes any sense whatsoever. But what is clearly wrong is the idea that you have to maintain presuppositions from myths in order to keep an idea that is actually good and working. For example, in the Middle Ages, they blamed the cause of sicknesses on everything from poisonous air to witches to demons. And they had quarantine houses for sick people in order to keep them away from the rest of the population. We kept this idea of quarantining people who have a sickness that might be harmful to us, especially highly infectious diseases that can be transmitted through air. So, due to you, would we also have to keep the whole witch and demon nonsense? Because otherwise the idea of the quarantine is suddenly not rational anymore? Does that really sound rational to you? But you know what? I agree with you that values can't be taken for granted, but have to be constantly defended and encouraged in order to not be lost. We can see that regularly right in front of our noses, for example with free speech, the separation of church and state, and countless other rights that people want to take from us. But values don't suddenly become more valuable for people who don't hold them just because you label them transcendental. Actually, you know what? Let me play along. If all our values have to have their transcendental basis and origins, then I demand reparations from the Christians and the Jews. You see, the West tends to be all into self-deprecations for crimes committed by their forefathers. That is something ridiculously common in societies with Christian or Jewish roots, and pretty much absent in many other cultures, as far as I know. It is also a core piece of the ideology of the social justice warriors. And if you really think about it, it is very, very irrational to blame yourself for things you personally haven't done. For example, if your forefathers colonized a place, that is not on you, that is on them. However, there is this thing called original sin, where the sin gets passed on generation after generation to the children. And it comes from a very particular set of holy books. I would argue that that sort of thinking has a devastating effect on Europe and the West as a whole. And therefore, as an atheist affected by it, I demand reparations. Because if you credit the religious roots of the West for the achievements of the Western development, it is more than appropriate that you take credit for its failures too.
To make a rational argument, you have to start with an initial proposition. Well, the proposition that underlies Western culture is that there's a transcendent morality.
No, it's not. There is no such thing as transcendental morality, and there never will be. Several places on Earth have different ideas about morality, and throughout history, the West itself has changed countless times its own view on morality, and it will continue to change, no matter how much you hide yourself in your transcendental bubble. If there are values you wish to maintain, such as, for example, free speech, freedom to vote, all human beings ought to be equal under the law, and so on, then let me suggest to you that you would be much more efficient in defending these values with arguments that resonate with your opponents, not yourself. There are countless propositions you can make in order to make a sound argument for said values. Flying pony person is just not convincing unless you are already completely caked in its dogmatic woo-woo.
Now you could say that's a transcendent morality instantiated in the figure of God. That's fine. You could even call that a personification of the morality. If you don't want to move into a metaphysical space.
Hold right there, Jordy. You were all this time complaining about how irrational it is to hold certain values, such as egalitarianism. And now you simply state how there is a transcendental morality, with no evidence for it whatsoever. And then you personify it into some imaginary god or not quite god, and that is suddenly supposed to make it sound less ridiculous? Aside from the obvious absence of basis for your claim, and even more obvious fact that the reality proves you wrong, if I were to take you at your word and assume that there is such a thing as transcendental morality, I would be very doubtful that it's actually a good thing, because it means that it's not related to any reasoning, but instead merely authoritarian top-to-bottom absolutism, for which as usual someone will claim absolute knowledge in order to control the masses for his own benefit. And it also means we cannot challenge or improve it. That to me doesn't sound like a safe basis of morality at all.
I'm not arguing for the existence of God. I'm arguing that the ethic that drives our culture is predicated on the idea of God, and that you can't just take that idea away and expect the thing to remain intact mid-air without any foundational support.
I agree. You're not arguing for the existence of God. You're pretty much indirectly blackmailing people to accept the idea of God out of fear that their society will collapse if they don't. I think I like your arbitrary transcendental morality even less now that I have had a taste of it. But since you brought up the pillars holding an idea, and I know how much postmodernist Christians such as yourself like wisdom imbued into stories an awful lot, let me tell you a very deep, meaningful, important story. There is this beautiful city called Venice, placed on wooden pillars of wood, and time passes by. Those pillars slowly rot away, and the city gets unstable. So there are these three guys coming along and wondering what to do about it, and there's Soci Justus War, and he says, who cares about the city? There are other cities equally as beautiful, and this city here and those rotten pillars, they just pollute the oceans anyway, so we may as well get rid of these pillars. And then Pete Jordanson comes along and he says, no, the pillars keep up the city. We must keep them. We must hold on to them, or the city will collapse. And then there comes Reptoidus Illuminatus, who has a UFO and always lands it on this house from a person called Siki, and it freaks Siki out. He ends up thinking Reptoidus is a demon, which, metaphorically speaking, he kind of is. And so this Reptoidus says, you know, why not replace the pillars with material that is more resistant to water, you know, and less likely to rot away? And of course you can see right away the transcendental value of this statement, where the morality, the virtue of the morality, which in this case is represented by the city, is carried by the rotting pillars of dogma and woo-woo, and they can no longer withstand the rough current of critical thinking and the corroding waters of fact-checking. And so this Reptoidus, when he proposes the more solid pillars, foundational pillars, that clearly represents the scientific evidence backing the advantage of these virtues of the city, and holds them up even if the current is strong. And we can see the depth of this transcendental story, where the meta-alpha, the Reptoid, lives as humans in his UFO with the answer that tells us we can have our pillars and eat them too. That's what it's all about. And if we don't understand that, if we don't understand how God made the cookie, then the cookie is a lie and godless engineer has eaten it. I know you see this, you cheater. You totally owe me a cookie still. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you really like what I do, consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you so much to the patrons who are supporting me already, and have a great day.